The year was 1975. Universal Pictures had just rejected Clint Eastwood's proposal to direct the outlaw Jose Wales for the third time. When Clint stood up from the conference table and walked toward the door, studio executive Richard Dayton made a comment that everyone in the room found hilarious. "Let him go. He'll be back in a week begging for whatever scraps we throw him." The laughter followed Clint into the hallway. He didn't respond. He didn't turn around. He simply walked out of the building, got in his car, and drove away. 30 days later, Richard Dayton would be desperately trying to reach Clint through every channel available. The calls went unanswered. The messages were ignored. Because by then, Clint Eastwood had done something the studio thought was impossible, and their laughter had turned to panic. The conference room on the 12th floor of Universal's Black Tower was filled with executives. 7 men in expensive suits sat around a polished table, papers and coffee cups arranged before them. At the head of the table sat Richard Dayton, head of production, a man who had built his career on saying no to people who thought they deserved yes. Clint Eastwood sat at the opposite end. At 45 years old, Clint had been a major star for over a decade. His westerns had generated hundreds of millions of dollars. His name on a poster guaranteed ticket sales. By any measure, he was one of the most valuable assets in Hollywood. But Hollywood didn't work on measures. It worked on power. And right now, the power was on the other side of the table. "Let me make sure I understand," Dayton said, flipping through the proposal Clint had submitted. "You want to direct this film yourself?" "That's right, and you want Final Cut?" "Yes. And you want to shoot on location in Montana, despite the additional costs." "The story requires authenticity. The story requires a director who knows what he's doing." Dayton set down the proposal. "With respect, Clint, you're an actor. A very successful actor. But directing is a different skill set. I've directed before. Play Misty for me, a small film that barely broke even. It was profitable. Barely. And now you want us to trust you with a major production? A period western with significant logistical challenges? I want you to trust my vision for this material." Dayton smiled, the condescending smile of a man who held all the cards. "Your vision. Let me tell you about vision." Dayton stood and walked to the window, his back to Clint. Every actor in Hollywood thinks they can direct. They watch someone else do it for a few years, and they decide it looks easy. They don't understand the complexities, the budgeting, the scheduling, the management of hundreds of people working toward a common goal. I understand those things. Do you? Dayton turned. Do you understand that this studio has shareholders? That we have a responsibility to minimize risk and maximize return? That putting an inexperienced director on a major production is the definition of unnecessary risk? I'm not inexperienced. One small film that barely made its money back. Dayton shook his head. I'm sorry, Clint. The answer is no. We'll make Josie Wales with a proven director. You can star in it if you want. But you won't direct. And if I insist, then we'll find another star? You're valuable, but you're not irreplaceable. The other executives nodded in agreement. They had heard this conversation before. Actors who overestimated their leverage, who thought their star power entitled them to creative control. They were always wrong. The studios held the money. The studios made the decisions. And actors, no matter how famous, eventually came back to the table and accepted what was offered. Clint was silent for a long moment. Then he stood. Thank you for your time. Clint walked toward the door. No anger, no dramatic gesture. Just a calm, measured departure from a meeting that had reached its conclusion. That's when Richard Dayton made his mistake. Let him go, Dayton said to the room, loud enough for Clint to hear. He'll be back in a week begging for whatever scraps we throw him. The executives laughed. It was the comfortable laughter of men who believed they understood how the world worked. Actors needed studios. Studios didn't need any particular actor. The math was simple and the history was clear. Clint heard the laughter. He paused at the door for just a moment, long enough to register the sound to note who was laughing and how hard. Then he continued walking, down the hallway, into the elevator, through the lobby, out to the parking lot where his car was waiting. He drove away from Universal Pictures without looking back. Behind him, the laughter continued. It wouldn't last. Clint didn't go home. He drove to the office of his lawyer, a man named Howard Bernstein who had been handling Clint's affairs for 15 years. How did it go? Howard asked. They rejected it. Again. I know how much this project means to you. Don't be sorry. Start calling. Calling who? Everyone. Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, Columbia, every studio that isn't Universal. Clint sat down across from Howard's desk. I want meetings. This week. I want to know who's interested in making this film with me as director. That's going to be difficult. Word travels fast in this town. If Universal passed, Universal laughed at me. Clint's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. That's different. How is it different? It's different because now it's personal. Clint leaned forward. I'm going to make this film. I'm going to direct it. And when it succeeds, because it will succeed, everyone who laughed today is going to remember that they were wrong. And if no other studio wants it, then we find another way. The next week was a blur of meetings and phone calls. Howard reached out to every major studio pitching the outlaw Jose Wales with Clint attached, as star and director. The responses were mixed but mostly discouraging. We love Clint as an actor, but director? The material is risky. A Civil War Western? That's a tough sell. We'd be interested if you found an experienced director, someone we could trust. But Clint wasn't discouraged. He had expected resistance. Hollywood was conservative by nature. Studios preferred to repeat what had worked before rather than take chances on something new. He needed a different approach. What about independent financing? Clint asked Howard during a late-night strategy session. It's possible, but expensive. You'd be putting your own money at risk. How much of my own money? Significant. Maybe everything you've made in the past 5 years? Clint considered this. Do it? Clint, are you sure? If this film fails, it won't fail. You can't know that. I know the material. I know the audience. I know what this film can be. Clint stood and walked to the window. The studios are afraid because they don't understand what I see. But the audience will understand. The audience always understands when something is real. Clint's financial team went to work. They assembled a package, a combination of Clint's personal investment, bank loans secured against his future earnings, and commitments from independent investors who believed in the project. The total budget, $8 million. It wasn't a blockbuster budget, but it was enough to make the film properly. Enough for location shooting in Montana. Enough for period-accurate costumes and sets. Enough to realize the vision Clint had been carrying for years. The financing was finalized in 3 weeks. When the paperwork was signed, Clint called Howard. It's done. It's done. You're officially the producer, director, and star of the outlaw Jose Wales. Congratulations. Don't congratulate me yet. The hard part is just beginning. What's the hard part? Making sure the film is good enough to prove everyone wrong. Filming began in Montana in April 1975. Clint ran the set with efficiency that surprised even his supporters. He had studied directing for years, watching other filmmakers, asking questions, learning the craft that the studios had told him he didn't understand. He shot quickly, decisively, without the endless takes and second-guessing that plagued many productions. He knew what he wanted, and he got it. The cast and crew responded to his leadership. I've worked with a lot of directors, one cameraman said. Most of them are terrified, afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of failing. Clint isn't afraid of anything. He makes decisions and moves on. How does that affect the work? When the director is confident, everyone else is confident. There's no wasted energy, no pointless arguing. We just make the movie. The production came in on schedule and under budget, but the real test was still ahead. Universal Pictures learned about the outlaw Jose Wales in May 1975. Richard Dayton was in his office when his assistant brought him a trade publication with a small article buried on page 12. Eastwood to direct Western. The article explained that Clint had secured independent financing for a film that Universal had rejected. Principal photography was already underway in Montana. The production was proceeding smoothly. Dayton read the article twice, then he called a meeting. How is this possible, he demanded. I told him we wouldn't make this film with him as director. I told him to come back when he was ready to be reasonable. He didn't come back, one executive observed. He found another way. He's risking everything on a film that experienced directors wouldn't touch. Maybe he knows something we don't. What could he possibly know? He's an actor, a good actor, but just an actor. Directing requires. And from what we're hearing, the production is going well. Dayton's face reddened. It doesn't matter how the production goes. The film will fail. It has to fail. And when it does, he'll come crawling back. And if it doesn't fail, it will fail. The first test screening happened in early 1976. Clint had finished the rough cut of The Outlaw Jose Wales and arranged for a private screening with a small audience, industry insiders, film critics, and a few trusted friends. The lights went down. The film played. For 2 hours and 15 minutes, the audience sat in silence, not the uncomfortable silence of disappointment, but the absorbed silence of people watching something that demanded their attention. When the final frame faded and the lights came up, no one moved. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. A critic Clint had known for years approached him after the screening. "Clint, that was remarkable. Thank you. I mean it. That's not just a good Western, that's a great film. One of the best I've seen in years." The studios didn't think so. The studios are idiots. This is going to be huge. Clint allowed himself a small smile. We'll see. The Outlaw Jose Wales opened on June 30th, 1976. It opened in fewer theaters than a major studio release would have commanded. It had less advertising, less promotion, less of everything that conventional wisdom said was necessary for success. But it had something else. It had word of mouth. Within a week, the film was playing in packed theaters. Audiences were recommending it to friends, returning to see it multiple times, creating the kind of organic buzz that no amount of advertising could manufacture. The box office numbers climbed steadily. First week, $3 million. Second week, third week, $7 million. By the end of its theatrical run, The Outlaw Jose Wales had grossed over $30 million, nearly 4 times its production budget. Critics praised it. Audiences loved it. Industry observers called it one of the best westerns ever made. And Richard Dayton watched it all happen from his office at Universal Pictures. Dayton started making phone calls. He called Clint's agent. The agent didn't return the call. He called Clint's lawyer. Howard Bernstein took the call but said Clint was unavailable. He called Clint's production office directly. A secretary politely explained that Mr. Eastwood was not taking meetings at this time. After a week of unanswered calls, Dayton's desperation grew. Universal was under pressure. Their own Western, released around the same time, had flopped badly. Shareholders were asking questions. The board wanted to know why the studio had rejected a project that went on to become one of the year's biggest successes. Dayton needed to fix this. He needed to bring Clint back into the Universal fold, to repair a relationship that he had damaged with his arrogance. He needed to apologize. But Clint wasn't taking calls. 3 months after the film's release, Dayton finally caught up with Clint at an industry event. It was a charity dinner at the Beverly Hilton. Dayton spotted Clint across the room and made his way through the crowd, rehearsing what he wanted to say. "Clint, may I have a word?" Clint turned. His expression was neutral, not hostile, not welcoming. Just waiting. "Of course." They stepped aside from the crowd. "I wanted to congratulate you on Josie Wales. It's a remarkable film." "Thank you." "I also wanted to—" Dayton hesitated. "I wanted to apologize for what I said in that meeting. For laughing when you left. It was unprofessional, and it was wrong." Clint nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. Universal would very much like to work with you again. We have several projects that would be perfect for your talents. As an actor, or as a director, whatever you want. Whatever I want, within reason, of course. But yes, we're prepared to be very flexible." Clint was quiet for a moment. "Richard, do you remember what you said when I walked out of that meeting?" Not exactly. You said I would be back in a week begging for scraps." Clint's voice remained calm. "You said I was just an actor. You said I didn't understand directing. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." Clint turned slightly as if preparing to leave. "But here's the thing. You weren't wrong because you underestimated me. You were wrong because you underestimated the work." "What do you mean?" "You looked at my proposal, and you saw risk. You saw an actor who wanted more than his place. You saw someone who needed to be put back in their box." Clint's eyes met Dayton's. "But you never looked at the material. You never considered that maybe I understood something about that story that you didn't." "Clint, I'm not angry. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm just not interested in working with people who laugh at things they don't understand." Dayton watched Clint walk away. The conversation had lasted less than 3 minutes. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet explanation of why the apology didn't matter. Dayton would spend the next several years trying to repair the damage. He would reach out repeatedly, each time receiving the same polite but firm refusal. He would watch as Clint built his own production company, made his own deals, accumulated the kind of power that comes from proving everyone wrong. And he would remember the lesson. The lesson wasn't about Clint Eastwood. It wasn't about any individual actor or director or studio executive. The lesson was about humility. Dayton had laughed because he was certain he was right. He had laughed because the math seemed simple. Actors need studios, not the other way around. But he had been wrong. Not because Clint was special, though he was, because the assumptions underlying Dayton's certainty were flawed. Actors didn't always need studios. Good material could find its own audience, and people who laughed at things they didn't understand often found themselves on the wrong side of history. The story of Clint Eastwood walking out of Universal became legendary in Hollywood. It was told as a cautionary tale, a reminder to executives that talent had options, that arrogance had consequences, that the person walking out the door might not be the one who lost. It was told as an inspiration, a reminder to artists that vision could triumph over institutional resistance, that believing in your work was sometimes enough, and it was told as a simple truth about power. The studios had spent decades believing they held all the cards. They controlled the money, the distribution, the means of reaching audiences. But Clint had demonstrated something important. Control wasn't absolute. Distribution could be arranged. Money could be found. And audiences, the ultimate arbiters of success, didn't care whether a film came from a major studio or an independent producer. They cared whether it was good. The outlaw Jose Wales was good. That was enough. The studio laughed when Clint Eastwood walked out. They stopped laughing a month later. Not because Clint punished them, not because he sought revenge or made their lives difficult. He simply moved on, built his own path, proved through action what he couldn't prove through argument. That was the real lesson. The most powerful response to mockery isn't anger. It isn't confrontation. It's success. Clint Eastwood understood this instinctively. When the executives laughed, he didn't waste energy fighting them. He redirected that energy into making the film he believed in. When they tried to apologize later, he didn't grandstand. He simply declined their offers and continued building his career on his own terms. The laughter in that conference room had been meant to diminish him, to remind him of his place, to signal that the power lay elsewhere. Instead, it became fuel. Fuel for a career that would span another 5 decades. Fuel for a legacy built not on studio approval, but on work that spoke for itself. The studio laughed when Clint Eastwood walked out. They stopped laughing a month later, and they never laughed at him again.